Chapter 2191. Cameron held her eye in pain and clenched her jaw. "You're not playing by the rules." The man grabbed her by her hair and sniggered. "You really are a good fighter, so we need to use some tricks." "It feels terrible, doesn't it? You can only blame yourself for being Mr. Southern Sr.'s daughter." Cameron couldn't open her eyes. She was careless when dealing with these goons. "All right, Miss Southern, please come with us." The man hit her, and she fainted. He then pushed her into the car and drove off quickly. Meanwhile, a black car rushed over while Waylon, who was in the passenger's seat, tried calling Cameron, but no one picked up. Quincy drove. "Do you think something happened to her?" Sadie had said that Mr. Southern was just as good a fighter as she was. It was impossible that something could have happened to her. Waylon stared at his screen and frowned. Even the best fighter might not always win. "Step on it." Quincy accelerated and suddenly saw cars blocking their way. He had to stop. "What's going on in front?" Waylon opened the door and looked forward. Cameron's car was parked in the bike lane, but there was no one in the car. The hood of the car had signs of a crash, and the traffic police were redirecting traffic, only keeping the witnesses there. Waylon heard what the witnesses said. After the accident, there was a fight between a few men and a woman. They hadn't seen how the woman was taken away by the men. When the officer asked if they recognized the woman, Waylon's eyes turned dark, and he walked out from the crowd. "I do." Cameron woke up and tried to open her eyes, but the sting in her eyes was still there. Her arms were tied, and she could hear footsteps around her in the dark. "Miss Southern, I'm sorry I had to bring you over this way." A man's deep voice sounded. Cameron could hear that it was a wide area, like a field, and she could smell trees and soil. It seemed to be near a beach, because the warm wind had a salty taste. That man didn't sound like Fabio, and he seemed to be their leader. She could guess the person who would kidnap her. "You're Donald?" Donald smiled. "You got that quickly." Cameron smirked. "Who else could you be?" "Fabio is having a hard time taking care of his own business, so he wouldn't dare do this." "You're really smart." He clapped his hands. "You blindsided me before, so we're even now." He was talking about Andre. Cameron tried to loosen the bindings around her arms, but she was tightly tied. "Are you trying to kill me?" Donald squinted. "Don't worry. I'm not going to, because it won't benefit me in any way. I know how strong your father is on this island. I don't want my plans to be ruined because of you." He walked closer to Cameron and looked down at her. "I'm afraid I'll have to keep you here for now." Cameron knew what he was up to. "You're going to use me to blackmail my father?" "Mr. Southern Sr. cares about you a lot. I'm sure he wouldn't want you to die." He then stood up straight and waved his hand. "Bring her onto the boat and make sure she gets some good rest." Cameron was picked up from the floor. She couldn't see, so she could only let them bring her to the boat. Chapter 2192. Donald stood on the deck while Chunky walked toward him. "Sir." He took out a pack of cigarettes and held one between his fingers. "Get someone to deliver a message to Sonny that we have his daughter. The decision is in his hands." Chunky nodded. Cameron sat on the bed, and there were deep marks from the abrasion around her wrists, because she struggled. Even though the pepper spray was sprayed on her eyes, it wasn't all of it, so she wouldn't be blind. She slowly opened her eyes. It still hurt, and her eyes were so sensitive that even a little sunlight would make them hurt. She clicked her tongue and gave up on struggling, then lay down on the bed sideways and laughed at herself. "If I keep walking by the river, my feet will eventually get wet." Someone opened the door and entered. The person placed down some food and sounded rude. "Miss Southern, eat when you're hungry. No one will be serving you." Cameron got up. When her eyes finally adjusted to the brightness, she squinted and walked toward the table. They served steak, but didn't give her a knife. Cameron smirked. She knew they didn't give her a knife so that she couldn't use it as a weapon. She remembered something, then walked behind the door and kicked it. How am I supposed to eat if you don't untie me? Someone was guarding outside. Figure it out. No one is going to serve you. Cameron leaned behind the door. You might as well give me dog food then. I won't need to use my hands. If not, untie me, or I won't eat. I'm not afraid of dying of hunger, because it's just going to make your lives harder. There was silence for a while, before the door opened. Cameron's eyes were still shut. Untie me. I'm blind. Do you think I might run away? The two men looked at each other. They didn't dare untie her without orders from Donald, because the Southerners were cunning. The man said, I'm sorry, but you'll need to speak to Mr. Matthews about that. She didn't care. Get him then. The man was annoyed. Mr. Matthews is a busy man. He doesn't have time for you. Cameron turned her face away. You want me to speak to him, but now you're saying he won't have time for me. Just say you won't untie me. Take the food away. I don't mind starving to death. The man lost his patience. Fuck. Do you think I won't hit you because you're a Southern? Try making a scene and see if I beat you up. Cameron smirked. Do it then. I'm blind and tied up. Are you afraid that the two of you won't be able to win if we fight? The man grabbed her by the collar with a scowl. You think I won't? Another man immediately tried to stop him. Calm down. She's a cunning woman. Don't fall for her tricks. Cameron doubled down. If I had a plan, I wouldn't be tied up here. You overestimate me. Please, just understand that I just want to eat. Is it possible without my hands? The man shoved her. Cameron lost her balance and fell to the floor. The man poured the food in front of her. Enough. I'm going to treat you like a dog. Clean it off the floor. Cameron glanced at the food on the floor, her complexion looking dark. She didn't move. The man pushed her head down. Why aren't you eating? Go ahead. Lick it up from the floor. Chapter 2193. Cameron's shoulders started shaking after holding her head down for a long time. Before the man could think, she started laughing. The man felt chills, as well as that she was mocking her, so he grabbed her hair and yelled, What the fuck are you laughing at? Cameron opened her eyes. Her cold eyes were bloodshot, and her eyelids looked swollen. People who are rude to me never have happy endings. Before he could process what Cameron said, the latter got rid of her restraints and wrapped the rope around his throat tightly. The man kicked around while his face was swollen and red as he was running out of breath. The other man put Cameron in a chokehold to try to get her away, but she twisted his finger upward. He let go because of the pain, but Cameron grabbed onto his arm and twisted it, dislocating it. The man who was strangled slowly ran out of breath while Cameron put a foot on his head. Half his face was on the food on the floor. Cameron looked down at him with no expression. Eat like a dog. You're doing a good job right now. A series of footsteps sounded from outside. Cameron closed and locked the door and looked back at the man. The man looked terrified and quickly moved backward. Don't kill me, don't. There was a knock on the door. Cameron picked up the chair and threw it at the window. After a few hits, a crack formed on the glass. She kicked it and escaped through it. Someone on the top deck chased after her. She escaped. Cameron climbed down on the pipes and noticed that someone was on the deck, so she took a deep breath and jumped into the sea without hesitation. Water splashed everywhere, and the cold seawater enveloped her diving body. All noises disappeared. She wanted to swim upward, but her legs started cramping. She opened her mouth and swallowed some seawater. I can't be that unfortunate. Cameron started losing consciousness and body heat, making her feel cold, as if she was being swallowed by darkness. She started hallucinating that someone was swimming toward her, closer and closer, until they finally grabbed onto her wrist and hugged her waist. Who is it? She lost consciousness and closed her eyes. Cameron, Cameron! She could hear someone calling her name, but her eyes were too heavy. She was tightly hugged. Cameron, don't fall asleep. Cam, my dear Cam, wake up. It was white everywhere, as if there was no end. Cameron heard a voice and slowly opened her eyes. A woman was sitting next to her bed and touched her hair gently. My dear Car, it's daytime now. Why are you still in bed? Her eyes finally focused. Mom? The woman lowered her head to kiss her forehead. I'm going to the sea with your dad today. Stay home and listen to the butler. I'll give you your birthday present when I come home. Cameron closed her eyes. Come back soon with Dad. The scene changed. There was a storm at the pier. The young Cameron stood under the umbrella the butler was holding, waiting for the team to get back, but her mother wasn't with them. Everyone was drowned in sorrow, including Sonny. Sonny stood in the rain, and his eyes were hollow and filled with sadness. He looked as if he was a decade older. I feel so bad for Mr. Southern for losing his mother on his birthday. I heard that the ship bumped into some traffickers. Mrs. Southern was stabbed while trying to rescue a child and drowned after being pushed into the sea. Mr. Southern was having a business meeting and didn't make it back in time. Sonny and Cameron were devastated. Chapter 2194. Sigh, that's life. The butler hugged Cameron by her shoulders and looked doleful. Sir. Cameron didn't cry her heart out but instead looked pale and void of emotions, like a hollow body. Suddenly, she had a surge of bravery and ran into the rain. Sir. She came to Sonny in the pouring rain. His head hung low, avoiding her eyes. She tugged at his hand. Where's Mom? He didn't speak. Cameron shook his arm when a tear fell. Mom said that she was going to bring my present back. Why isn't she back yet? Why did she lie? Does she not love me anymore? Sonny's body felt weak as the rain fell on his face and blended in with his tears. He handed her the present that he was clutching. Cameron took the box and cried out loud. Sonny knelt, hugged her, and said in a hoarse voice, Cam, it's my fault. I shouldn't have let her on the boat. I'm sorry. Cameron cried until she lost her voice. She didn't love the sea because it was where her mother met with her untimely death, but she still traveled by sea with her father and never mentioned it to anyone. She hated the bad people, so she had to become stronger, so strong that no one could bully the people around her. She felt that her mother's death was her father's fault. She wouldn't have died if he hadn't left her mother on the boat because of his business. But one day, Sonny brought a girl who was around her age to her. Cam, this is Mahina. She was the child your mother saved on the day of her accident. The first time Cameron saw Mahina, the latter was only skin and bones and was covered in wounds. When she remembered that her mother had died because of this girl, she rejected her. Sonny told her Mahina was a girl that was trafficked and didn't know who her parents were, nor had she ever seen them. Her wounds were all from beatings, and she was extremely skinny because she didn't sleep or eat well. She was 7 but looked like she was 4 or 5 because she was severely malnourished. Mahina had escaped to the boat and bumped into Cameron's mother. She saw that she was a pitiful girl, so she didn't send her away and even gave her food. Mahina remembered Cameron's mother for saving her life and felt very guilty because Cameron lost her mom because of herself. However, when her mother saved her, she must have thought that someone would do the same if it was her daughter who was in trouble. Cameron's mother had a big heart and was admired by many. Even though it wasn't her own child, when she knew the child was in danger, she did all she could to save her. To others, saving someone while sacrificing themselves might not be worth it, but if her child thought so too, her sacrifice would have been meaningless. She might just hope that her child would one day do the same to save someone. That was why Cameron thought that her mother was naive. Why did she sacrifice her life to save someone else? It wasn't worth it. Mahina said, I will save you when you're in trouble in the future. Cameron turned her face away. There's no need. After a pause, she whispered, I can save and protect myself. I will become stronger so that no one can hurt me and I can protect the people around me. I don't want anyone to sacrifice for me, and I won't do that either. Chapter 2195. Mahina smiled. I know that'll be the truth. Cameron opened her eyes and suddenly realized that she was lying in a hospital bed. She then heard Sunny and Mahina's voices. When they saw that she was awake, Sunny immediately walked over, looking worried. Cam, you're awake. Mahina smiled. You're finally up. I'll go get the doctor. The doctor walked in and checked her, then spoke to Sunny. She's fine. Other than some liquid in her lung and a low fever, she's all right. Sunny nodded. Thanks. Mahina sat at the edge of the bed and asked, How do you feel? Cameron stared at the ceiling and didn't answer. Sunny adjusted the grip on his cane. He was relieved but remembered something, and anger crawled back up. You knew that Donald wouldn't do anything even after he kidnapped you. All you needed to do was sit and wait for us to rescue you, but you just had to go against them. If Willie hadn't saved you, I would have had to bury you instead of the other way around. After saying that, he sighed. If something really happened to you, I wouldn't be able to face your mother when I died. Cameron looked at him. I've seen her. Sunny was stunned. What? Cameron slowly sat up. Maybe because of her dream, her head spun. I said I've seen Mom, so you won't get the chance too soon. Sunny was rendered speechless. Mahina looked down and slowly said, I'm sorry. I should have come after you. If something really happened to you, it's not your fault. I'm fine, ain't I? Cameron rubbed her temples as she cut her off. At that moment, Camaros recalled something and asked, Where's Wayne? Sunny scoffed and turned away. Now you remember him? Cameron looked around and didn't speak. What she had seen in the sea wasn't an illusion. Wayne really saved me? Why would he do that? Daisy and Waylon showed up outside her room and smiled when they saw she was awake. You're finally awake. Daisy was going into the room when Sunny suddenly grabbed her. All right, Cam is fine. Let's go outside. He asked Mahina to come along. Daisy realized what he was doing, so she left the room, giggling. Only Waylon and Cameron were left in the room, and it felt awkward. Waylon walked to the chair next to the bed and took a seat. Cameron asked, Why did you save me? He leaned back in the chair. You saved me once before. When? In the woods. That's different. She looked down because she had only helped him treat his wound in the woods. He had jumped into the sea to save her. It was very different. They might both drown if she were still conscious or panicked and grabbed onto him too tightly. The dangers involved in both situations were drastically different. Waylon picked up the pink pig plushie on the table and played with it. What's the difference? If you had left me there, I might not have survived. Cameron didn't speak. Waylon raised his brows. Your father knows that you don't like the sea. You wouldn't go to the beach even though you could swim, so even if you wanted to die, you wouldn't choose to drown yourself in the sea. She choked. That's nonsense. Who says I was trying to kill myself in the sea? She wanted to live. He pinched the nose of the plushie and squinted. Then why did you jump? Chapter 2196. Cameron was momentarily stunned and fell silent. Honestly, she did not know why she wanted to jump either. She hated the sea, but she was still living on the island. She woke up to the sea every day but just couldn't bring herself to like it. Cameron chose to stay in her room whenever she went to the sea to do business. She would never stay on the deck if she had nothing to do. When she found no lace at sea, she had asked her crew to fish him out. In fact, she did not have to save him at all. After all, she did not have to care if he was alive or dead, but perhaps she thought about how her mother died in that freezing sea, so she changed her mind. Why would she choose to jump at that time? Was it because she did not want to fall into Donald's hands and bring trouble to the Southern clan? She was not sure about it. Cameron glanced at the pink pig plushie in Waylon's hand as a trace of disgust crossed her eyes. What are you? Kid? Don't you feel embarrassed? Waylon chuckled. This is a gift for you. She thought her ears had failed her as she couldn't believe what she had heard. What? Is he serious? He's going to give this ugly plushie to me? What am I? A kid? Waylon dusted the dress on the piglet plushie and said, Don't you think it looks a lot like you? Something must be wrong with your eyes. How could he say this thing looks like me? Am I Pigsy the piglet? Waylon leaned forward and said, Your eyes are still swollen. Cameron touched her eyes and asked, Are they? Yeah, he replied flatly. Then, he suppressed the urge to laugh and handed the plushie to her. Its eyes are swollen too. Cameron was rendered speechless. She grabbed the pink pig plushie and fell back down. Initially, she thought she would throw the plushie away, but she did not know why there was a voice inside of her telling her that she should not throw it away. As such, she put it to the side and closed her eyes. Waylon stretched his hand and placed it on her forehead, stunning her. The back of his palm was cold, and she felt comfortable. Wait a second. What is he doing? You still have a fever. It has been 2 days, said Waylon. Suddenly, he realized that her cheeks were getting redder, and he chuckled. What happened? What are you blushing at? Cameron turned sideways as she did not want to see him. The tips of her ears were as red as cooked shrimp, and she pushed his hand away. Get off me. The smile on his face deepened. That's why I said you look like a pig. Shut up. He leaned closer. Why should I? You, Cameron was infuriated. She turned her head around, and when her lips accidentally grazed through the corner of his lips, she was stunned. Waylon's face was very close to her now, so close that she could even count his eyelashes. Cameron couldn't come around to her senses for a long time as his warm breath enveloped her. They were not touching each other intimately. It was just a simple graze on his lips, yet it tickled her heart. Her heartbeat raced, and when she finally came around to her senses, she grabbed his shoulder and pushed him away from her. Don't get so close all of a sudden. Waylon raised his eyebrows. It was you who suddenly approached me. She was stumped. It's you. He chuckled. All right, it's me. Cameron was dumbfounded. She did not know if her brain was playing a trick on her or not, but she felt that Waylon had become a different person now. She averted her gaze and said, I need to rest. Waylon placed his hands on her shoulders and pressed her back on the bed. She looked at him blankly and set her jaw tightly. After tugging her in, he said, Rest well. After Waylon left the ward, Cameron placed her hand over her heart, which was racing rapidly. Her heart had been fluttering so fast that she began to wonder if she was having a heart attack or not. Meanwhile, Donald was infuriated that Cameron had run away. He killed those 2 men and threw their bodies into the sea. Donald's face was dark as he was standing with his hands behind his back on the deck. Chunky walked up to him and turned his head around. There's a change of plan. Gather all the members of the Skull Club. Tell them to get ready. If those people under Fabio still refuse to give in, kill them off. Chapter 2197. Donald was going to take over all of Fabio's territory on the island today. This would be the only way if he wanted to go up against the Southern clan. Chunky nodded. Roger that, sir. The Southern clan soon learned that Donald had taken over the Southwest District. However, due to the cruelty of the Skull Club, several organizations in the Southwest District refused to comply with Donald's orders. The shops were closed due to the chaos there. Even the passers-by and local tourists were affected and had no choice but to hide in hotels. Sonny, Waylon, and others gathered in a private room in Yuzu Villa to figure out a way to solve this issue. After listening to Mahina's report, Quincy commented angrily, the way Donald does this will only leave the East Islands with a bad reputation. It'll also affect the business of the Southern clan. If he does take control of Fabio's territory, I'm afraid the public won't accept it. Since he's doing this, it means he doesn't care about the outcome anymore. He just needs to take over Fabio's territory and get his people for his own use, Waylon said, flatly. Sonny nodded. He's worried that we'll go after him since he kidnapped Cam. If we make a move now, he'll do whatever he can to fight us, even if it means his own downfall. After he finished talking, he rose to his feet slowly and walked up to the window. Even if we're going up against a group of outlaws, I don't want anyone to sacrifice themselves. There are many innocent tourists and businessmen on the East Islands. We must ensure their safety. At the same time, Quincy received a call. The person on the other side of the line said something, and he smiled. All right. Got it. He turned his head around and said to them, Interpol has arrived on the island. With the people from Metropolis on the island, I think it's enough for now. Sonny turned around and replied, all right. I'll ask my men to cooperate with them. It was a hot day, but dark clouds enveloped the island, and a sudden downpour washed over it. Several cars were heading toward the Southwest District. After they entered the town, the streets were empty, and there were very few vehicles. A local guard stopped their vehicles. The driver lowered the window and pulled out his ID card. The moment the man saw the ID card, his expression changed. Before he could do anything, a police officer got out of the car at the back, pounced on him, and pinned him on the ground. At the Southwest Villas. Donald pushed open the door and entered the villa. He looked around at the luxurious and impressive decoration and said inwardly, everything here will be mine from today onward. When Fabio heard the commotion, he came downstairs and asked, what are you doing here, Donald? Chunky sent someone to take Fabio down, forcing him to get down to his knees. Fabio looked at Donald and snarled, are you mad? How dare you and your men barge into my territory? Donald chuckled. Mr. Puzo, the southwest side of the East Islands belongs to me now. As for your men, they have switched sides and are mine now. Fabio was stunned. How is that possible? Why is it not possible? Even if you're still their leader, you have lost the Park and Chamber of Commerce, your main source of income. With tens of millions of dollars in debt and no money, do you think you can still order them around? Donald walked up to him and stopped in front of him. He looked down at him and continued. Soon, those debt collectors will come to take your villa, so you might as well sell it to me. I might even be able to give you a sum of money. Where do you get so much money? Before he could finish his sentence, Fabio realized something. Manuel has given the money to you? That's right. I made a deal with the Skull Club with the money he gave me. Or else, why do you think the Skull Club defected to my side? Chapter 2198. Donald had been planning this since he came to the East Islands 2 years ago. Manuel was just the first step of his plan. After getting Manuel's trust, he asked him to transfer the money he got from the commune to him. In exchange, he would help Manuel to achieve his goal from the back. This explains how he could control everything when he came to the East Islands, a place he was unfamiliar with, as a fugitive with nothing. He could even rope in the Skull Club. Fabio's body was trembling with anger. You bastard! What kind of deal have you done with them? Donald looked at him as a triumphant grin crossed his face. I told them that I'd give them a share of the pie after replacing you. After that, he straightened his body and walked to the side. I admit that you're ambitious. You want to expand your influence to Aura. That's why you have been roping in the organizations from other places. You want to absorb their organization and make them bow down to you, but you've forgotten that power is just as important as profit in their eyes. Also, I can give them what they want that you can't. Fabio let out a cold smile and said, what can you give them? Do you think I don't know that you want to make them submit to you as well? Stop making it so noble. We're all the same. We're just doing it for profit. Nope. I'm not doing it for profit only. Donald turned around to look at him expressionlessly. I have bigger ambitions than you. I'm not just going to become the local tyrant of Aura. What I want to be is the king of a country. Fabio let out a laugh, and his eyes were filled with mockery. You want to be the king of a country? A fugitive like you? That's the funniest dream I've heard. Whether it's a funny dream or not, it doesn't matter. What matters now is that you've lost. Donald grabbed him by his collar as a devilish smile crossed his face. Mr. Puzo, you lost. You've lost everything, but don't worry. I'll inherit your will and expand your influence into aura. And I'll get the power and the position that belongs to me. As he finished speaking, he released him and dusted his collar. I'll promise you that it'll be a painless death. Chunky pulled the gun's hammer and aimed at Fabio's head. Yeah, I lost, Fabio stared at the gun and chucked. But you can't win either. If you kill me, you won't be able to get out of here anymore. Donald stopped Chunky and looked at him. Suddenly, a group of fully armed police officers in bulletproof vests appeared upstairs. Chunky and one of Donald's men stood in front of Donald and protected him behind them. Understanding instantly dawned upon Donald, and he turned his head to glare at Fabio. Fabio, do you think the police will let you go if you cooperate with them? You've killed a lot of people too. Fabio snorted coldly. I have lost everything, so I have nothing to fear now. Besides, even if I work with the police to lure you into their trap, I'll be sentenced to 10 years in prison. If I perform well in prison, my sentence will be reduced as well, so I won't die. As for you, I told you that you'll end up worse than me, so your victory means nothing. Someone from upstairs came down with a gun in his hand and shouted, "Nobody moves, and drop your weapons." Donald's man turned around and whispered, "Sir, let's retreat." Donald put his hand on the man's shoulder and said, "I'll count on you then." Just when the man was about to say something, Donald grabbed his hand and pulled the trigger. The bullet whizzed through the air and hit the person who was going down the stairs in his chest. Even though the person was wearing a bulletproof vest, the person still fell down the stairs due to the impact. He hastily raised his hand and killed the man. Nobody realized what Donald had done. They all thought the police had killed their comrade, and they all went on a rampage. Chapter 2199. Donald used the crowd as his shield from the gunfire. Chunky and two men dressed in black were shooting back while covering him to escape. When they arrived at their car, they hopped into it and started the engine. The group of police officers came out and fired at the car, but it was ineffective. Seizing their chance, they drove the car away quickly and left the group of police officers behind. The rain was getting heavier with each passing second while the car sped through the rain. When the man dressed in black noticed that there was a blockade at the front, he hit the steering wheel and made a U-turn to leave through another road. Gritting his teeth, Donald said, "Damn it. I underestimated Fabio. We need to get out of the East Islands right away." He was certain that those international police officers were there for him. Since he had already been exposed, he couldn't stay in the East Islands anymore. The heavy rain had obscured their vision. They couldn't see anything around them except for the road ahead. Suddenly, he vaguely saw a truck coming straight for them. Donald shouted, "Watch out." The collision pushed the car off the road. The driver tried his best to regain control of the car, but to no avail. He could do nothing but watch as the car charged aimlessly into the forest beside the road and hit a tree. The tree was snapped into two pieces and fell down. The windscreen shattered. The driver was injured and fell unconscious. Chunky, who was sitting on the passenger side, kicked the door open. He covered the wound on his forehead with his hand and walked toward the back seat in the rain. "Sir, are you all right?" Donald's head hit the door during the collision. He felt dizzy and could see nothing but stars in his vision. He got out of the car, and Chunky hurriedly went up to support him. "What happened?" Chunky shook his head. "The rain is too heavy. We didn't see that truck coming at all." The man dressed in black in the car was injured as well. He got out of the car in an unsteady gait, and before he could realize anything, someone knocked him out cold from the back with a spanner. Chunky and Donald heard the commotion, so they turned their heads around. There was a man dressed in a black raincoat behind them. He was wearing a mask, so they couldn't see his face clearly. Chunky pulled his gun out, and the man reacted quickly by throwing a spanner at him, knocking Chunky's gun out of his grip. The man then jumped over the trunk of the car and kicked Chunky away. Donald threw himself at him and started exchanging blows in the rain. The man fought like the Southern Clan's members. His attacks were both powerful and lethal, so Donald thought he was one of the Southerners. After Chunky got back to his feet, he came forward and helped Donald to fight the man. The rain was getting heavier, and all of them had difficulty breathing. The man intercepted a punch thrown at him by Chunky. Then, he retaliated by hitting Chunky's neck with his elbow, sending him tumbling over the car. Donald pounced on him from the back and tried to strangle him with his arm. The man grasped at Donald's arm tightly and kicked the car door to perform a backflip. Donald lost his balance, and both of them fell to the ground. Chunky quickly picked up the spanner and attacked the man once again. The spanner hit the man's mask, and it fell to the ground. When Donald saw his face, he snorted coldly. "I knew you were still alive, no lace." As the rain trickled down Nala's face, he said, "Yes, I'm still alive. I'm sorry for letting you down." Donald took off his wet jacket. He was panting heavily as a devilish grin crossed his face. "It seems like you are that, Neil. You must be desperate since you've been hiding in the dark the whole time. It's such a shame that I couldn't kill you back then, but I'll kill you now since you have the guts to show yourself before me." After Donald finished speaking, he threw himself at No Lace again. No Lace intercepted his attack, and Donald mocked, while both of them were exchanging blows. "What happened? Have you given up being the young heir of the Knowles and decided to become the lapdog for the Southern Clan?" No Lace pushed him away and took off his raincoat. He undid the button on his collar and replied, "What about you? You came all the way here to hide, but you don't have any way out now." "Donald, can you still not see the situation?" Chapter 2200. "Do you think it's that easy to catch me?" Donald attacked No Lace once more. "I won't admit defeat. Even if I'm going to die, I'll drag you down to hell with me." Meanwhile, Mahina went into the courtyard with an umbrella. She put the umbrella at the side and walked into the living room. Mr. Southern Sr. Sonny looked at her and asked, "How is the situation now?" "Donald has escaped." She paused for 2 seconds before continuing. "But Mr. Knowles has gone after him alone. I think he can hold him off until they arrive." Daisy jerked up from her seat. "He went after Donald alone?" Mahina nodded. Daisy pressed her lips tightly as she couldn't believe that No Lace would go after Donald alone. Just when she turned around, Sonny said, "If you go there now, it'll only make the situation even more complicated." Daisy replied, "What if Donald still has something up his sleeves? I can't let him face Donald alone." Mahina chimed in. "I'm sure Mr. Knowles knows what he's doing. If you go there now, he'll be distracted as he'll need to take care of you. At that time you might not be able to retreat safely." Sonny nodded. "That's right. Daisy, you should have faith in him." Daisy lowered her head. He had promised her that he would not do anything dangerous anymore. Would he be able to keep his promise this time? Meanwhile, Quincy and the police had sealed off all the ports to make sure that Donald couldn't run away. In the forest, No Lace put down Donald with a punch. Both of them were exhausted, and Donald couldn't hold on for too long anymore. He scrambled up from the ground and said, "No Lace, I knew you were like me a long time ago. Maybe you'd be one of my trusted men if you're on my side." After he finished speaking, he threw a punch at No Lace. No Lace could not evade his attack in time and got hit in the face. His body turned sideways, and after he regained his balance, he wiped the blood off the corner of his lips and chuckled. "Unfortunately, we're destined to be enemies." Donald pounced at him, and they rolled along the ground. After evading a punch from Donald, No Lace kicked him away. While Donald rolled along the ground, he pulled out his gun and aimed it at No Lace. No Lace froze, and his face sank. Donald laughed when he saw his expression and said, "I have a gun. Do you really think I'd fight you? I was just doing it to lower your guard. You don't have any energy left to fight back now, right? So die now, No Lace." He pointed at his head and pulled the trigger. Yet, nothing happened. Donald was stunned. He pulled the trigger 2 more times, yet nothing happened. Seizing his chance, No Lace kicked him, Donald fell to the ground, and the gun flew away from his hand. Crawling on the ground, he tried to reach for the gun. This is impossible. There's nothing wrong with my gun. No-Lace took his gun faster than him. Donald was stunned. He lifted his head and looked at him through the rain. No-Lace ejected the magazine and threw it on the ground. Donald picked it up and froze. There were no bullets in the magazine at all. How could this be? He kept his gun on him the whole time unless someone had changed it. No-Lace reached out for a gun in his pocket and said, "This is your gun." He pointed the gun at Donald's forehead and continued. "Do you want to know who changed your gun?" Donald clenched his fists tightly and replied, "Did you plant a mole beside me? Have you not realized one person is missing?" Donald turned his head around and saw that Chunky was lying on the ground. Surprisingly, the man who should have been unconscious in the car was walking toward him now. Jake took off his jacket, his wig, and the fake skin on his face, to reveal his real face. Donald asked dumbfoundedly, "Since when?" "He has been with you from the moment you went to Fabio's villa," No-Lace replied as he looked at the dumbfounded Donald. "When you realized there were police in the villa, you'd certainly try your best to run away. You'd need someone to cover you if you wanted to run.